السلام علیکم ناظرین، آپ دیکھ رہے ہیں نسیم زہرا ٹیٹ۔ آج ہمارا بڑا ایک اسپیشل پروگرام ہے۔ پاکستان کے بہت سے ممالک کے ساتھ اچھے تعلقات ہیں۔ ایک وہ بلاک ہے ممالک کا جن کے ساتھ ہمارے خاص طور پہ اہم تعلقات ہیں۔ یہ ہمارا سیکنڈ لارجسٹ ٹریڈنگ پارٹنر ہے، یورپین یونین، اور ان کی جو سفیر ہیں امبیسڈر اینڈرولا کامینیرا، آج انہوں نے ہمیں جوائن کیا ہے۔ تو اب بات ان سے ہم کریں گے ظاہر انگریزی میں، آپ کو ساتھ ساتھ پتہ چلتا رہے گا، لیکن ہم نے سوچا ان سے پوچھیں کیونکہ افغانستان پہ بھی یہ لوگ بڑے کنسرنڈ ہیں، پاکستان کے حوالے سے بھی، ہیومن رائٹس کے حوالے سے بھی کچھ ان سے بات کریں گے، کشمیر کی، کچھ کلائمیٹ کے ایشوز کی، کچھ ٹریڈنگ جو ہماری ریلیشن شپ ہے اس کے بارے میں۔ تو ان سے بات کرتے ہیں۔ وارم ویلکم ٹو یو امبیسڈر، تھینک یو سو مچ، تھینک یو فار گیونگ اس یور ٹائم۔ So let's start with what you have been concerned about, the European Union has been concerned about. A few days ago I heard that the European Union wanted to hold a humanitarian conference in Bonn recently. What came of it?
This was an initiative that was launched by the Germans. In the end, it would not take place. It was some of the ideas that were floated in order to bring together countries that are concerned about the evolving situation in Afghanistan. And of course, there's a number of these initiatives currently taking place. There's a big event in Moscow where a number of countries, including Pakistan, is represented. So this was one of many ideas that were floated in order to bring together countries in order to join forces to see how to respond to the current crisis in Afghanistan.
What was the idea? I mean, what's the biggest concern about Afghanistan as far as EU is concerned?
Well, first and foremost is the situation vis-a-vis the Afghan people and the ongoing economic and also humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. Let me start by saying that Afghanistan has been receiving from the EU humanitarian aid for many, many years. Let me clarify that Afghanistan has been in a situation of humanitarian needs for a number of years. However, since the summer, there's been additional problems that have added to the existing caseload of Afghans that need humanitarian aid. First of all, over the last few years, there's been an ongoing drought. This year, it's expected that because of the drought, there will be minus 30% production of wheat in a country that already has other problems. Because of this situation, also for the change of government, interim government in Afghanistan, there's a lot of the basic services that are not functioning as they were before. They had problems. Now those problems are multiplied. There is an economic situation. GDP of Afghanistan has gone down by 30% in a year. Over the last few years, Afghans have been borrowing money in order to survive. So you had large part of the population already owing money. Plus, winter is coming. I know that every year, sort of like August, September, the European Union would provide additional humanitarian aid in order to help with the needs because of the cold weather coming. There are statistics that are absolutely horrifying. There was a pledging conference in Geneva in 13th of September, a UN pledging conference for Afghanistan. And they produce statistics on what is going on. There's estimates that say something like 30 million out of the total population of 35, 36 million would need humanitarian aid. There's estimates that say there is potential risk of over 1 million or approximately 1 million children starving to death over the next, let's say, 6 months to a year. So all of this, it's almost like the perfect storm vis-a-vis Afghan people, on top of the political situation.
So yeah, it's very painful, potentially can be very, very, can be disastrous. And apparently 14 million can go towards starvation if enough food is not provided. So clearly EU is looking at this as a largely humanitarian challenge, crisis right now. So the Bonn conference was going to take care of that, because according to the UNHCR, when we talk to them, they say that the money that was pledged is not forthcoming at the speed that it should come.
The conference that I mentioned, the UN system was requesting 600 million. In fact, $1 billion dollars was pledged. But I have to underline that the humanitarian system has never been able to upscale so quickly to cover needs of such a 30 plus million people. So, of course, money is important, but it's not just the humanitarian financing that also that can help. In order to deliver humanitarian aid, you have to have people on the ground. You have to be able to pay them. You have to be able to move around freely. You have to be able to bring in additional humanitarian workers. You need, if you're going to meet the needs of women and children, particularly in the context of Afghanistan, you need to have women humanitarian aid workers. If you're delivering aid to women in the cultural context of Afghanistan, we as the European Union, we recently pledged 300 million euros in humanitarian aid, plus 250 million euros, this is the last few days, for aid to keep some basic services going. Most of the health centers, they don't have personnel, or they don't have medicine, or both. So you can cover some of the needs through humanitarian aid, but a lot of other things also need to exist or function in a country.
So you need the kind of distribution infrastructure which can actually on the ground.
Exactly.
So according to UNHCR, most of their people, I mean, the UNHCR chief, as you know, of course, was visiting here, and he was saying that their staff refused to leave after August 15, and that they are very much intact, and that they are actually carrying on the work that they were doing. And as you mentioned, this crisis is 1 year old, right? It's not like, predates August 15.
Of course.
So in some ways, it seems that the funds is also a very crucial issue. And in fact, he said that when he met with the Taliban recently, he said, I told them we need women on the ground, and they were okay with it. So their women are there on the ground. So it seemed like money in cash, and as you said, payment for staff, payment for the government officials, etc.
Of course, what you're saying is very correct concern. And again, Pakistan has been very helpful in facilitating that. In fact, getting EU nationals and also Afghans of EU concern was one of the 5 benchmarks that the EU has set as, let's say, our asks from the Taliban.
Just moving back to EU and Pakistan in the context of Afghanistan, even the humanitarian aid, Pakistan has been pretty involved in the distribution setup, etc.
Absolutely. And I know Pakistan has also been providing its own humanitarian aid.
Yeah.
We're very much aware and thankful again for this, but also facilitating humanitarian aid coming via Pakistan for Afghanistan. We're also trying, to the extent possible, to buy humanitarian aid on the Pakistani market in order to give it to have it transferred into Afghanistan. This also makes sense because you're a neighbor, but also I think it's important not to forget that
Pakistan has started importing food for the first time in its history. Nazreen, is par hum break lete hain. We'll take a break and come back and continue the conversation. Hamare saath rahiye. बैक नाज़रीन, पाकिस्तान के वैसे ताल्लुकात EU के साथ हम अभी बता रहे थे आपको GSP प्लस वगैरह ट्रेड्स हैं, लेकिन इस वक्त जो इशू बड़ा अहम है वो अफ़गानिस्तान का इशू है. उस पर कंटिन्यू करते हैं एम्बेसडर साहिबा से. सो वी वर टॉकिंग अबाउट अफगानिस्तान एंड यू वर सेइंग दैट पाकिस्तान हैज़ बीन इन्वॉल्व्ड एंड दैट यू वर बाइंग फूड ऑफ द पाकिस्तानी मार्केट एज आई थिंक अदर्स आर, एंड पाकिस्तान इटसेल्फ इज सेंडिंग फूड सप्लाईज. सो in terms of the medium term and long term, Pakistan's role in in the peace process in Afghanistan. I mean, the peace ended up in a way that nobody was expecting.
Exactly.
Not even the U.S. President Joe Biden, right, with all his intelligence. But anyway, the peace process. How does EU see Pakistan's role in the last year?
But again, there I think Pakistan was quite instrumental in helping to bring, let's say, all the parties to the table and to have the Doha discussions. Unfortunately, they didn't go the last step, which was to have an agreement that would have changed things on the ground. And
you think that's why Zalmay Khalilzad went home?
I cannot comment on why he decided to resign, but
he's gone.
Anyway, I mean, let's say if this was what we have was by design, I cannot imagine that was, let's say, the designed outcome.
It's interesting though, because when you read a lot of U.S. press, they, there are comments in New York Times and others, leading writers say that the fact that some people are surprised that this happened is the real surprise.
That's for, there will be a lot of analysis for many, many years, I think, to understand why, let's be honest, the whole international community did not have that on their radar screen as one of the options.
Will it take that much analysis, you think so? Isn't it obvious?
Obvious, but everybody was surprised. I think even the Taliban themselves were potentially surprised at the speed of the change in the government.
The speed of the collapse of the army, although they were carrying on back channel, negotiations with the Afghan National Army, and they knew this was going to happen. Seems like you go to some of the reports that were written, Carnegie Endowment report by one of their specialists in 2007 or 2006. It's entitled Taliban Winning Strategy. So, and it's in detail in terms of how the Taliban have an alternative system of providing justice and providing security.
I think you could potentially forecast that, because the Taliban were always saying that, you have watches and we have time on our hands.
Yeah, that's right.
Phrase. But I don't think that, at least not publicly, there was any side of the international community that was saying this was going to happen within a few weeks.
Yeah, within days.
Maybe a few months was the worst case scenario of all of these forecasts, was over a few months or 6 months, potentially there will be a switch in the government, but not the way it happened.
General Kani said this to President Obama almost a decade ago, right? 6-7 years ago, it's all on record. Now they're talking about it. And in fact, if we follow the discussions and the debates in the US Congress, the congressional debates, they're at each other saying, you didn't tell us, you told us, we knew. But anyway, that's now history.
Exactly.
But it's always good to learn from history. So coming back to where we are now, in terms of the future, so this seems to be, even EU, this question of human rights on the one hand and humanitarian concerns on the other hand. And one of the things that seems to keep emerging is that if you push too much on human rights, then humanitarian suffers, because if you're going to hold back money and funds, it will mean that the humanitarian, as we discussed earlier, as you were rightly mentioning, that money is needed.
But
how do you balance it?
Let me say that humanitarian aid, not in the case of Afghanistan, but globally, is provided, at least from the EU, without any consideration of the political aspects.
Okay.
We are in countries where there are dictators and we don't agree with them. We are in countries where there's needs, we provide humanitarian aid. It's non-political. Development cooperation funds, that is a different type of story, because usually development funds are provided via the government and they are
given to the government.
Yes, provisions that we do not provide development cooperation funds if there are issues and problems with the government in any particular country. When it comes to Afghanistan, we have said that there are these 5 benchmarks One was to allow the EU nationals to leave. Humanitarian aid to have unimpeded access. We provide humanitarian aid to those that need it.
What's your distribution channel, right? The government? Or the
humanitarian aid is through UN organizations or NGOs. And let me clarify that even before August, we were providing humanitarian aid on both sides, both in the government-controlled areas in Afghanistan and in the non-government-controlled areas. One of the benchmarks is an inclusive government, which obviously the current one is not.
So what does that mean? If it isn't, do you reduce the aid? You say we hold back? What do you do?
No, there's benchmarks for recognition, which we're not in the...
I think nobody is going for recognition at this point.
But we are engaging with them. There's absolutely...
So your policy is exactly the same as the US policy?
Yeah, I mean, I would not comment on the US policy. I can only tell you about ours. But
no, I'm saying, do you coordinate with the US closely on this?
This is EU policy. I mean, the divide between development cooperation and humanitarian aid is a global. All countries that provide development cooperation provide it under what I've just described. And when you're providing humanitarian aid, it's according to humanitarian principles. And these are global types of principles.
So one of the things that is being raised now as we kind of look at the emerging situation inside Afghanistan, as you said yourself, that 70-80% of the salaries were coming from budgetary support, which falls in development aid thing, right? So if you're talking about needing an infrastructure and an operational system to provide humanitarian aid, because ultimately even if you have NGOs or UN, you still need a government, functioning government. So if the salaries continue to not come, then providing humanitarian aid gets impeded. How do you deal with that?
But this is why we've said it's 300 million humanitarian aid, and 250 million, we call it humanitarian plus, to in a way to keep the basic services going, for example, in order for the whole system not to collapse. But we are not doing it for sure via the government.
So you are, I mean, your heart does beat for them enough for you to not stick bureaucratically to completely non-government.
No, it's not a black and white situation. We're trying to do as much for the Afghan people, given the situation that is currently on the ground.
We'll take a break now. नाज़रीन ब्रेक लेते हैं. आप सुन रहे थे वो क्या कह रही थी कि हम इतनी सख्ती नहीं हमने की हुई कि ब्लैक एंड वाइट हो, कि हम खाली गवर्नमेंट को बिल्कुल ना दें, क्योंकि गवर्नमेंट को चलना है, और अगर गवर्नमेंट को चलना है तो फिर उनको पैसे भी कुछ ज़रूरत है, तो वो भी कर रहे हैं, साथ ये भी कर रहे हैं, लेकिन हालात तो मुश्किल अभी भी हैं. ब्रेक लेते हैं, उसके बाद वापस आते हैं. विल कंटिन्यू द डिस्कशन. स्टे विद अस. वेलकम बैक नाज़रीन. हम बात करें EU के एम्बेसडर से, और बात ज़्यादा आप जैसे सुन रहे हैं अफगानिस्तान पे हो रही है, लेकिन देखते हैं कुछ आगे भी बढ़ते हैं. और सो इन द कमिंग डेज एंड वीक्स humanitarian becomes the most kind of critical aspect. And where do you see this going? I mean, Pakistan itself has had a meeting with the Afghan government last week, talking about drawing up, SOPs in terms of interaction, etc. That still is a process. It will take time.
Yes.
Do you think that the humanitarian aspect will be further addressed so that we're not seeing enough coming in on the humanitarian front? It can, God forbid, collapse, right? So what is European Union's thinking on this?
First, we are following closely. Secondly, we've moved back into Afghanistan to be on the ground. We're delivering aid as much as we can. We're working with others to mobilize not just our aid, but other countries and other regions. At the UN conference that took place, we were one of the institutions that really helped to have that pledging conference to bring also others on board. We are also helping in trying to put together some sort of, also working with the UN, but prioritization of what needs to be done and where, in order to, since there's not enough resources, to avoid gaps and to cover as much of the needs as possible. So we're being very pragmatic and very hands-on vis-a-vis what's happening.
Do you have a functioning system? I mean, do you have an office?
Humanitarian aid we had an ECHO office, which is our humanitarian branch, and our colleagues are back in Afghanistan since a few weeks ago. They are on the ground talking to the partners, talking to the NGOs, and also trying to have as many data on what's happening as possible. With respect to actual Taliban, there was a meeting that took place in Doha recently, where special representatives from a number of countries and also from the EU had meetings with the Taliban. So it's not that we have put a block. We will not talk. We will not recognize. But we will engage, and we are continuing to do our best in that respect.
How effectively have you been able to encourage the US? They've frozen funds, right? 8-9 billion, and that's kind of a huge amount, right?
Funds have been frozen, but we're encouraging all countries to take a more pragmatic. For example, on the access of girls to schools, we have taken note that in the 4 northern provinces they have opened schools to girls. That's very, very important to see on the ground, because of course that was one of the things that we were working on in the past. We don't want to see whatever progress took place in Afghanistan be wiped out, and of course 50% of the population needs a future as well.
Sure, absolutely, and I think Pakistan is on board, and so are countries in the region on that front. In terms of immigration, I think the EU has been talking to Pakistan also, and it seems that there's generally countries beyond the region have been talking about refugees, and that Pakistan should be more responsive. So Pakistan also, I guess, has the same concern as EU does, that if things begin to collapse, then refugees come into Pakistan, and living in Pakistan, what is our state of the economy and how things are so hard for us. So I think that EU and Pakistan have a shared objective right now to make sure that things in Afghanistan get going, and humanitarian aid is delivered. So I think on that we have a good partnership going right now.
Absolutely, and again on the issue of Afghan refugees, we have recognized the very positive role that Pakistan has played for the previous waves of Afghan refugees. There's more than 3 million Afghans already in Pakistan, and I want to underline that we have been supporting Pakistan in dealing with the additional cost of having these Afghan refugees here. And where we have been providing funds, we have also been providing funds for the local community, the host community that has Afghan refugees.
You've tried on the financial front, certainly. Recognizing that there is always a non-financial dimension to refugees, etc., especially if they've been with you for 30, 40 years, which is the case here. Last question, Ambassador, you speak with so much concern and literally tenderness about the Afghans who are suffering, and it's very encouraging to hear you not sound bureaucratic and not kind of divide in terms of black and white.
I take that as a compliment.
Yeah, but it is a compliment. It is a compliment. So let me take you to Indian held Kashmir. Let me take you to the atrocities there. Even the European Parliament came out with a report on this. Reports do come out, discussions take place, but are we saying that you can do nothing at all on Kashmir?
We have never said we can do nothing.
I'm asking.
And that has never been our position. Our position has always been that this is an issue that is predominantly can be solved between the two countries. We have said that human rights should be adhered to, and this is a common position for many, many years. We follow the situation very closely. I think what the Pakistanis, because this is an issue that a lot of Pakistanis raise, what the Pakistanis are asking is for us to make public statements against India. But let me tell you, in all we do, here, in India, in every country of the world, public diplomacy is one thing. Bilateral ties and what we discuss with the country where we are is another thing. And I don't want to equate the two things, but let me give you an example. When things happen here, which, let's say, the EU does not agree with, my role is not to make public statements and accuse parts of the government or whatever about the events. My role is to discuss with the relevant authorities here and try to find solutions. I can assure you, my counterpart in New Delhi is having similar discussions with the Indian government. But overall, such disputes can only be addressed by the countries concerned, and this was what we have been encouraging repeatedly over the years. We have been engaging with India. We have made, there were statements by the European Commission, also in the European Parliament, where we have expressed our concerns. So it's not that we have been, this is something that we've been silent about. What we try and do is look at the substance rather than look at to be seen to be doing something.
No, but I don't think that I'm asking for PR activity here. I'm simply saying that the fact is that when you say, number one, this is not addressing an issue in a host country where the normal norm is not to be public and to make statements, which some countries don't follow, and I'm glad you do follow. Yeah. But it's an international issue. Mm-hmm. It is there at the UN Security Council, as much as the Palestinian issue, on which we say near silence, and they get away with murder, literally and figuratively. And as far as bilaterally Pakistan and India dealing with this, with input from the Kashmiris, after what the Indians have done in 2019 August 5th, thrown everything that was even remotely could lead towards a solution for the Kashmiris is for everybody to see. So India seems in no mood, and there is the international obligation, if we agree that the UN Security Council means something.
But also on Palestine, you said that there's silence. The position of the EU is clear and open that we are to state solution. Also in India, this is what I've said. We have been taken we have made public statements on what we would expect to see there. We have talked about human rights being adhered to. We have been following very, very closely. We are in contact with India, and we have bilateral discussions with them. Issues are being raised with them. So I don't think we can be accused of ignoring what is happening there.
I was only asking. I was not accusing.
Yes. No, but and also, in any dispute, in any situation, in order to have a role, you have to be accepted. So in every country where we have representation, where we have an embassy, that's the role of our presence there, in order to have honest, straight discussions with the country concerned. That's something that I can assure that takes place. The other side of it is not to make public statements accusing any country of anything. I think you can achieve a lot more by having those relationships, engaging and discussing those things bilaterally than by making public statements that...
Yeah, I just hope things yield something just and fair for the Kashmiris at the end of the day. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for being candid and frank in this interview. नाज़रीन, इसी पर आज का प्रोग्राम ख़त्म करता है. बहुत अहम इंटरव्यू था, बहुत अहम शख्सियत थी, लेकिन पाकिस्तान पर हम बात नहीं कर सके. लेकिन जहाँ बात की, जिन इश्यूज़ पे बात की, वो बड़ी ज़रूरी थी. आप हमारी तरफ से आज इतना ही. खुदा हाफिज़. पाकिस्तान जिंदाबाद.